Hello, welcome to Introduction to Poker Lecture 1. So lectures 1 and 2, we didn't have any recording equipment set up for the lecture rooms. There are cameras in some of the rooms, but after asking around, it seems to be something that's really kind of more meant for Berkeley faculty, and that's tough for us to gain access to recorded lectures. So for lectures 3, 4 onwards, the current plan is that just going to have a Zoom room running that records the lecture along with the slides as we talk. The audio quality might not be the best, but I guess it'll be more convenient. We'll try to figure out maybe it's like a speaker clip on or something. But yeah, so for these two lectures, it's just going to be me talking after the fact. The four names here, Aiden Riley, Teo Dawes, Shannon, Calvin, AJ, are me and our four co-instructors. We each are responsible for different sections of the course. Yeah, so it's always hard to go to the next slide. All right. So first lecture, introduction. And also, I want to say that my camera's brightness always gets so dark for some reason. I promise all my lights are on right now, and I'm not living in a cave. So about us, I guess about me. Math major, I've played poker since high school. I'm from Florida, where you can play poker from when you turn 18. Enabled my addiction from a very young age. And in addition to No Limit Hold'em, which is what this course is all about, I also like playing another variant called Pot Limit Omaha. Play a decent amount of that. Outside of poker, I'm an officer in Berkeley Investment Group and the trading club here at Berkeley. I'm also a chess addict, so add me on Lee Chess, WCG Rider. If you know where I stole that username from, then you're probably too advanced for this course, but it's okay. It's a good thing if you know. And then lastly, yeah, big idiot who doesn't proofread emails. Oops, my bad. Not going to do Shannon or any of the other lecturers. You only get to learn about me because I'm the one doing this recording right now. Come to lecture to learn more about the other teachers. So anyway, course structure, 30, 30, 30, 10. If you look, 60% of the grade is between lecture attendance and playing session attendance. So you need 70% to pass, and you get 60% just for showing up to the course. And then if you basically do any of the remaining work, any of the homework, final project, then you will pass the class. It's very, very easy to pass this class. Last semester, we got rated. I did a survey at the end of the course, and people were giving it like 1 out of 10s, 2 out of 10 course difficulty to pass. That being said, we still had to fail like 2 or 3 people. And they literally never came to lecture or playing session. They had sub 10% attendance. They send out emails saying like, what are you doing? We're going to have to fail you. Never got a response. We don't want to have to fail anybody. Please don't snatch a failure from the jaws of an easy pass. As for the rest of this course website, so that's the one that what is currently listed is from last semester with lectures from last semester, which are admittedly of lower quality because I was just kind of getting used to the swing of things in terms of making PowerPoints and presenting. So we're getting to get that updated soon with the newer, higher quality lectures. Until then, all of these will be posted in the Discord for you to be able to see. And right now, the only way you'd see this recording is if you're in the Discord. So I'm hoping you found the invite link. Now, specifically for homework, it'll be graded for effort and completion, which means that if you do it wrong, you receive credit unless pretty much everything wrong or no effort is given. If we ask for a sentence explaining why a hand is better than another, then you answer it wrong and then write one word too, then yeah, that's starting to kind of fall into the no effort plus wrong side. So it's really, again, very easy to get full credit on this. Yeah, and homework will be assigned every week and is due by email. So this one was, when I made this version of the lecture, it was for the Teo Aiden decal section. Each section is going to have their respective email or method of submitting that be made clear for you as when I release the first homework in a few hours. Yeah, so final project, if you look on the right here, thankfully when we're doing this over Zoom, it's a lot easier to read. People are having trouble seeing this in person for the lecture. What's on the right is known as a hand history, which is a written log that goes over every detail of a poker hand. It's probably pretty confusing right now. The numbers, all the information might seem scary, but the way that professionals improve their game is by analyzing interesting hand histories in depth. They have databases of literally hundreds of thousands, millions of hands. And then they will mark hands that they thought were interesting, that they thought are a weird situation or could be relevant to the game where they thought they might have made a mistake, and then do a lot of detailed math and analysis and ask for advice. work on it. So that's what we're going to do for our final project. 5 to 10 hands over the course of the semester. Right now, don't really worry about it. It wouldn't make sense to analyze hands from the very beginning of the course when you had no clue what you were doing. We'll start as the course goes on. We'll say, hey, maybe about now is where you should start maybe flagging hands to see if you were happy with how you played this down the line. Yeah. Course expectations. Said pretty much the first half. Please attend. We don't want to have to fail anybody. Again, we will fail because it's really easy to pass. So don't feel bad. And also don't start any chats within Discord about playing for real money. It can get us in a lot of trouble. If you want to play for real money, go ahead. Just don't have it affiliated with us. We do not encourage you to play or gamble real money. We will never play for real money during the course. You'll never have to wager your own money, and it is meant for an understanding of the game from an educational and analytical perspective. So, yeah, what to take away? We're not pros. Some of the other instructors are very, very good. I'm just okay. And I'd say a lot of these bullet points describe me. I study poker. I play a lot of poker. I have a good understanding of poker. If I knew everything, I would absolutely drop out to go make money at the tables. And we hope to share a fundamental understanding of the basics of poker strategy with you. At the end of the course, you'll be able to absolutely destroy your high school friends, your friends that don't know what they're doing. You'll mop the floor with them. Hopefully, you'll understand poker on a deeper level, and you'll want to learn more about it. It's an incredibly complex, rich game with a lot of theory and strategy to it. And yeah, you'll have a good basis to expand on. You'll find out it's a very, very complex game. And then one thing I do want to mention is that a lot of people who took it last semester, who really engaged with the course, practiced, learned from it, said that they went to play at a casino and they felt like they weren't just holding their own. They were winning. They felt confident and good playing at low stakes live at the casino. So this, I don't want to make promises that don't materialize, but this course should be sufficient to prepare you to play poker at a casino. So speaking of playing at casinos, what makes poker different? So saying you might have heard before is the house always wins, and people assume with gambling, you're destined to lose money and that's all that can happen. The thing with poker is we're not betting against the house, we're betting against other players. The way that the house makes their money is they take something called a rake. They take money out of the middle of each pot, but that doesn't stop us from taking everyone else's money. We can still win. Now, another thing is that poker has a very large amount of variance. Winning players can lose for ages, for tens of thousands of hands, and similarly, losing players can make $1 million and think they're the best in the world. And then this is what makes poker a lucrative game you can make money playing. The swings of variance prevent many losing players from realizing that they're bad. And like someone will have night after night after night of winning session and think, you know, everyone keeps telling me that I'm playing poorly, but they're wrong. I'm right. I'm making money. And then you talk to them again a few months down the line and they're thousands of dollars in the hole. Their luck is reversed. In the long run, the best player wins. In the short run, it's basically a coin flip. And it's a good thing. It can be frustrating, but that's what lets you make money playing poker. Because if it was just purely skill, no one's ever going to bet on a chess game. If it was purely skill, no one would bet on poker. In the short run, it's luck. In the long run, it's skill. So now we're going to go over some more common misconceptions in regard to poker. And then this is probably the biggest one, where courtesy of Hollywood, poker is a psychological game where you try to look your opponent in the eyes and read their mind. You're trying to look at their body language and see how they're breathing. This is definitely a part of poker, but it's a very small part of poker. And tells and reads are useless if you don't have strong poker fundamentals to go with it. A simple example could be, let's say that with my expert mind reading ability, I realize that somebody has a weak hand right now. Like out of all the hands they could have in this given moment, their hand is weak. I could apply pressure. I could get them. I should call this bet or something like that. Well, what good does that information do me if I don't know what a weak hand for them would be? It could be that the weakest possible hand they have right now still destroys me, blows me out of the water. Its tells and reads are very small. What is very important, and this took me years of playing to realize and many thousands of dollars of lost money. So I just want to emphasize this. The part that is most important is keeping focused, energized, and playing with a level head. If you start to feel sleepy, tired, unfocused, just stop playing poker. You're going to lose money. I always would think playing just 6 or 7 hours into a grind session of poker, it's 4 a.m. I think to myself, oh, I feel fine. I can keep playing. These people are terrible. And then invariably, I'd call off a bet for a few $100s. And then as I was driving home, frustrated, I'd be thinking and realize, wait, that was a terrible call. What was I doing? And it's just all mental fatigue. Poker success hugely comes down to your mindset. And so that's the part we're going to have like a whole lecture, I think, emphasizing this, where just how important it is to play focused. Very last point, it's turning out I think I ramble more when I can talk freely on Zoom. Most high stakes poker play occurs online where tells are nearly non-existent. There's one kind of tell called a timing tell, but yeah, at any given day, you can log on to PokerStars or GG Poker, and there's people playing $100,000 buy-in cash game. Millions are getting slung around, and absolutely none of them are playing based on tells and reads. And as far as hoodie and sunglasses go, if you ever watch, again, any super high stakes pro poker game, all of them are wearing t-shirts. No one's got the sunglasses and the hoodie and they're hunched over. And at least for me, when I sit down at a table and I'm trying to see who I think is good and who's not, the person I'm always really scared of is if they've got like a collared shirt on and they're sipping a green tea or they're reading a book at the table while they play. I'm not scared of the dude with the glasses hoodie. Like, yeah, it's not really necessary. Next common misconception. Now that we just said it has nothing to do with psychology, that people think it's just math and you're doing 15 calculations at once. It's not really like that at all. In most poker games, you have at most 60 seconds to decide. And if you take 60 seconds every time, people will get very mad at you. A lot of times you have 5 seconds to make a decision, maybe 30. And that's not nearly long enough for even powerful computers to calculate what to do. You can buy $10,000 processing power computer, hook it up to top of the line poker software. It would not be able to tell you what to do within 60 seconds. It would take it at least 4 or 5 minutes. And that's with a really nice computer. If you have a pretty decent one, it takes like hours. So what we actually do when we play is we use heuristics. We use problem solving approaches, practical and sufficient for reaching a short-term estimation. We have a pretty good idea of what kind of strategy we should be aiming for, the kind of general strategic principles and logic at play, and then we apply that quickly. Math is a significant part of decision making, but you can memorize pretty much all the math you need. So it could be, oh, there's a 36% chance this happens. Well, you either can calculate it on the fly, which it's not that hard. We're going to go over how to do it. It's pretty simple, actually. But we can also just remember that this happens 36% of the time because there's only like 10 or 15 of these numbers you need to learn. So pretty much every pro has the numbers memorized. You won't have to do math as you play. Sans this one specific situation where you have to start counting and adding stuff up and doing the math. Otherwise, you're fine. And the very last misconception is that poker is counting cards just like in blackjack. You've seen that movie 21, you need to be a genius to count cards. They're not really comparable at all. When you're counting cards in blackjack, it's just memorizing a whole bunch of rules. It's called basic strategy. You just memorize, and you can do it in a few hours. You memorize, if dealer has this cards and I have these cards, then hit me. If not, don't hit me. Here's where you should double down, things like that. You just memorize rules. Poker playing, on the other hand, thousands of hours to just even be okay. I've sunk at least 1,000 hours into this game, and no one would really call me more than decent. Yeah. And when you're playing poker, it's not just memorizing rules. It's not, I've read enough rules and internalized them that as I play, it's automatic. If you want to be a good poker player, it takes a ton of creativity, on the fly thinking, and deep understanding of the structure of the game. The best poker players will always just do something that blows your mind as you're watching them play. They're like, what the heck? That doesn't make any sense. And then as you really stop and start to think it through, you realize that it was just a great idea, brilliant, risky. Yeah. That's what I like about the game personally. The very last thing in parentheses, you can't make money counting cards in blackjack. This goes back to the house always wins rule. The moment you start counting cards, the casino will check you out. Even if you try to be sneaky, you can't really make any money doing it. Poker, you can make many, many thousands of dollars. Blackjack, not really. So with my rambling out of the way, get into foundations of winning poker. So this, beyond the misconceptions, to be good at poker, it isn't to be a mind reader, a human calculator, anything like that. It's about constantly critiquing your game and your opponent's game. There's been a bunch of different professionals at the highest level playing wildly different strategies. Hyper aggressive, super trappy players that are laying bait to try to trick somebody else, things like that. The key to be a great poker player is to always be thinking, well, what weaknesses do I have in my game right now? How are other people bullying me? And then you're trying to patch up your weaknesses in your strategy. And then you're also thinking, well, this person, I think they're calling too many bets. I can really tune up my aggression and make more money when I've got a good hand. We're attacking their weaknesses, their shortcomings. And then if you are really conscious about how you do this over time, you become much better at the game. That's really how good poker players become great. So, preliminaries out of the way. We said that to take this class, you didn't need to know the rules of poker, and we meant it. So we're going to go over the rules of poker most of today. It's important to realize that poker, it seems really complicated when you write it down. As you play, it'll take under an hour for you to pick up all the rules, the gist of how it's really played. It can just be a bit confusing when it's spoken. So anyway, it's played with a standard 52 card deck with 4 suits: spades, hearts, clubs, diamonds. For those of you who haven't seen this color scheme before, it's a 4-color deck. It's supposed to be good for colorblind people because then they can see the cards. I also just like how it looks. I think it's prettier. There's also 13 ranks, 2, 3 through king and ace. And at the start of each hand, we are dealt 2 cards, and as the hand progresses, community cards are dealt out of the deck up to a total of 5. So we're going to go over how these community cards are dealt out. These community cards are called the board. So if there's 3 of them out there, we say there's 3 cards on the board. If I use 3 community cards in my hand, I say I used 3 from the board. And then the goal in poker is to make the best 5-card hand possible using the 2 in our hand and the community cards on the board. So poker can be played from anywhere from 2 to 9 people, and we will be focusing on the 6-player variant. The reason is that this is the most common form online, as well as it's a really great sweet spot for teaching people about poker. When you play with 2 or 3 people, it's a completely different game. The strategy is wildly different. It gets really crazy really quick. When you play with 9 people, it ends up the game is a lot slower. You have to be more patient, more passive. 6 is this nice happy medium where there's a lot of action, but it's constrained. There's not the insanity you see with 2 players. Yeah, it's great. 6 applies very well for 9 max, so it's definitely the best for learning the game. Yeah, so now as for the other rules, each player has a stack of chips in front of them denoted in big blinds. So I could have 100 big blinds in my stack. Yeah, okay, I forgot to delete this. There's bottom 2 are duplicates. I made that mistake earlier. But yeah, so the value of the big blind will change based on the stake you're playing. The stake basically just means how big the buy-in is, how expensive it is. So if I'm playing poker for $1,000, that's a higher stake than if I'm playing poker for $100. And the way that we denote stake is through the small blind and the big blind. So for example, 1-2 means the small blind is 1 and the big blind is 2. The small blind is almost always half of the big blind. The only real exceptions are like 2-5, which it's close to half the big blind as they can get. Yeah, we're going to go over the small one more in a second. Yeah, so at a given stake, the stack sizes vary, but we'll assume them to be 100 big blinds always for the purpose of this course. 100 big blinds is the standard buy-in anywhere. So at the 1-2 stake, this means that a player will buy in for $200. This is kind of why stake is measured in terms of big blinds. If the stake is 2-5, I'll buy in for $500. If the stake is 5-10, I'll buy in for $1,000. So the higher the big blind gets, the higher, the more amount of money you're playing for, essentially. So now we're going to get into the hand rankings. This is definitely confusing for beginners because there's just so many of them. I'd recommend as you play, you have them pulled up on your phone there so you can read them. Make sure, hey, do I have a good hand? Do I have a bad hand? What kind of hand do I have? That sort of thing. So in this ranking on the right, 1 is the best, 10 is the worst. And it's important to remember that we're allowed to use any number of cards in our hand as long as it is a total of 5. so to make these hands. So let's say I wanted to make 4 of a kind. I could use 1 ace from my hand and 3 aces from the board, plus a king from the board. So I could use 1 from my hand and 4 from the board. I could use 2 from my hand if I had 2 aces and there's 2 aces on the board, or I could even use 0 if all 4 aces are on the board. It's important to keep this in mind because it can confuse some beginners. And there actually are poker game types like Pot Limit Omaha that I mentioned earlier, where you have to use exactly 2 from your hand. I need to play 2 cards from my hand in my hand. Very last thing I want to mention is if you look at this list, how it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 through 10, you might look at, say, 9, a pair, and be like, oh, that means a pair is bad. It's the second worst hand. You got to remember, as you move up in this list, the rarity increases very quickly. So, for example, I have never made a royal flush ever. I have played hundreds of thousands of hands of poker and I've never gotten a royal flush. Daniel Negreanu, probably the most famous poker player, claims to have never made a royal flush either. They're that rare. I've made 3 straight flushes ever. Yeah, they're just very rare. It's very likely you will never make 4 of a kind the entire time that you're in this course. So what ends up happening is that pairs are actually a very strong hand. Most of the time in Texas Hold'em, a hand is won with a pair. And generally, like flushes, full house is considered fantastic. Straights are great. So yeah, this isn't like an absolute thing. It's important to keep that in mind. So something that can confuse new players is how hands of the same strength are tie broken. If we both have a pair, who wins? If we both have a straight, who wins? So important is that suits are always equal. We'll never break a tie by saying, oh, I had a spade, but you had a heart, something like that. No, they're always equal. All tie breaks are settled by rank. If I have a pair of 2s, that's worse than a pair of aces. If my straight is 5 through 9, that's worse than a straight 6 through 10. Yeah, it always goes weakest, which is the 2. Strongest is the ace. One important rule that it's like a very small idiosyncrasy is that ace 2, 3, 4, 5 is a straight, but otherwise the ace is always high. So the ace is high or low only for straights. 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace is a straight. Ace 2, 3, 4, 5 is a straight, but that's it. Everything else is just correct order. So like King, Ace, 2, 3, 4, not a straight. The king can't go low. Only the ace can go low. All right. So now that we've kind of gone over hand strength, how the game gets set up, we're going to go over how an actual hand gets played out. At the start of each hand, one player posts a small blind, meaning they are forced to make a bet of 1 small blind before the cards are dealt. And then creatively, the player who pays this is known as a small blind. Similarly, player to their left is the big blind because they pay a big blind. The reason that this is a rule is in order to incentivize people to play hands to get action, we need to make someone put money in the middle. So after the end of each hand, the blinds shift to the left one. So every 6 hands, you pay a small blind and you'll pay a big blind. So you're constantly losing money by posting this as you play poker. So you got to be playing hands to win the money back. It's kind of the idea. So what this looks like is small blind here posts 0.5, big blind posts 1. And you're going to become very, very familiar with all of these position names as we go throughout the semester. They're actually really important. For now, for today's purposes, we only really care about small blind, big blind, and I guess under the gun. Wait, whoops. So pre-flop, the bet starts out at 1 big blind, the amount posted by the big blind. So action begins with the player to the left of the big blind, who is the under the gun player. This is how they get their name. They're the first to act, so they're under the gun. Yeah. And so the under the gun player has the option to either call the 1 big blind, raise the 1 big blind, so maybe raise to 3 big blinds or something, or they could fold. So folding just means that you give up, you're out of the hand, you don't get to act anymore, and you have no chance of winning money. So action proceeds clockwise with each player facing the same options. And then, so the player to the left of the big blind, the under the gun player, to the left of the under the gun player, it's called the hijack, will have the same option. They can either call the existing bet, raise the bet, or fold. Now, this last bit here about the big blind closing the action, I thought for a very long time on how to write this and make it not confusing, and I just couldn't get it to work. It's one of those things that as you write it out, it's very quirky, but as you actually play, it's really intuitive. So at some point, the pre-flop betting round will end, and we'll go on to the next betting round. So the big blind is the one who controls when this betting round ends. If they call or fold to a bet that every other player has already had the chance to respond to, then we go to the next round. If the big blind is already folded and out of the hand, then the small blind, the player to the right, is now the one who's in charge of closing the action. So visually, this might make more sense. So under the gun folds, hijack raises, cutoff calls, button folds, small blind folds, and so this 3 big blind bet here, everyone has had the chance to respond to it. The hijack raise, cutoff called, button fold, small blind fold. So now when the big blind calls the bet, it closes the action. Everyone had a chance to react to the bet. Next betting round. Yeah, again, it'll become more intuitive as you play. So now 3 face-up community cards are dealt onto the board for the flop. Action now begins with the small blind, not the under the gun player. So this is a really important distinction and has a huge effect on poker strategy. Pre-flop, the very first person to act is under the gun. Post-flop is the small blind. Going first is a pretty big disadvantage, as we're going to cover. So both of those positions generally aren't very good. Now, once again, if the small blind is folded, it's the closest player to their left. So it would be the big blind then who'd act first, for example. This time, the bet is going to start at 0 big blind. So pre-flop, it was 1. You either had to call the 1, raise the 1, or fold. Now there's an additional 4th action, which is to check. So checking is saying, I don't want to bet any money, but I don't want to fold either. I'm not going to do anything. Person to my side can go. And if the bet gets raised to above 0, say someone raises to 3 big blinds, checking is no longer an option. Checking is only an option when nobody's bet yet. And now action is the same way as pre-flop, but now the button closes the action. So pre-flop, under the gun goes first, and then the big blind closes the action. Post-flop, small blind goes first, button closes the action. Again, it seems kind of like arbitrary, like why? But as you play, it becomes very intuitive. So big blind here checks, says, I don't want to bet. Hijack, you go. Check. Cutoff says, hey, I want to bet. Now the big blind has to call or fold. Calls. Hijack folds. And because everyone has had a chance to respond to this bet, where the hijack folded, big blind called, action closes, next betting stream. So from this, it's pretty much identical for the turn. Same rules as far as checking, betting, everything goes. Same rules as far as who goes. The only difference is now 1 more card gets added to the board. We've got the 9 of spades out there. Big blind checks, cutoff checks, next betting stream. So now the very last card is dealt, the river. And action, once again, is identical. The only difference is that once the betting round has ended, oh yeah, and I forgot to mention this in this slide. And if any point everyone else folds, that player wins the spot. So here, if for some reason the cutoff folded, the big blind gets all the money in the middle. Yeah. And now for the river, in addition to winning by getting everyone else to fold, you can win by having the strongest hand at showdown, which occurs once the river betting round ends. Once you make it to showdown, players show their hands. There are specific rules on when you do or don't need to show your hand that we don't care about for this class. If you're ever at like a casino, people will be very serious about this. If they really don't want to show the hand they lost with. I don't mind personally. I don't think it matters that much. And whoever has the highest hand strength will win the pot. And if players have identical hands, then the pot is known as chopped. So we'd each take half. Or if 3 of us have the exact same hand, we each take a third. Along that lines. So what this looks like, here, big blind bets 15. Cutoff calls the 15. And now, because the betting round has ended because they called, we go to showdown. So players compare their hand strength. And here, the big blind has a pair of jacks, a pair of 4s, and then an ace kicker. We're going to learn about kickers next lecture. And then the cutoff has a pair of aces and just that. So the cutoff loses, and the big blind takes all the money. And that's it. Then we move on to the next hand. Putting it all together. So yeah, just want to say this all takes quite a bit of practice. The best way is to learn the rule. To learn is to just play and watch poker. Don't worry if they don't make sense right now. I would have had trouble learning off of PowerPoint too. Please learn it by as soon as possible, because it's hard to teach poker strategy and people don't understand the rules to begin with. And I'll say this: poker has been a staple of casinos for like over half a century now, and it wouldn't be a staple of casinos if it was like that confusing or that complicated of a game. It's quick to pick up. So with the rules out of the way, it's time for a crash course on game theory. So now if you are an economics major or stats major or anything like that, you're going to get mad at how bad we're about to butcher this, but for the purposes of our course, it's fine. So the Nash equilibrium. Mathematician John Nash won Nobel Prize for research on game theory, and one of the defining concepts of his work on non-cooperative games, like poker, was that of the Nash equilibrium, which is the optimal solution in which each player lacks any incentive to change their initial strategy. So for poker, this would be a situation where neither player could ever make more money by playing differently. Like, let's say that I notice my opponent is playing a very poor strategy. If I were to deviate somewhat, I can make a whole bunch more money. Nash equilibrium would be that's not a thing. No matter what I do, I can't make more money. It's not to say that I'm making money currently. It's just I can't make more than what I do right now. So if two perfect players played each other, they'd make $0 on average, and there's nothing they could do to make more. Now, the question you need to answer is if there's such a thing as a perfect poker player to begin with. Because again, a lot of times you see in the movies where it's like a rock, paper, scissors thing, where if someone knew what you were doing or you thought you had a great strategy, well, they could come around and get you. In reality, there is a perfect strategy. A finite game is a game with a finite number of possible states. And poker, when you're playing it, it feels functionally infinite. It feels like there's just infinite possibilities, but there's actually a finite number of game states. There are hundreds and hundreds of millions of ways that the cards can be dealt pre-flop, and then there are hundreds and hundreds of millions of ways there can be different chips in each player's stack, the cards that can come on the flop, the actions people can take, but it actually ends up still being a finite amount, just extremely huge. And one of Nash's famous theorems is that every finite non-cooperative game has a Nash equilibrium. So therefore, Texas Hold'em has a Nash equilibrium. So we in poker have a strategy that if our opponent and I were both playing this strategy, we have no incentive to change what we're doing because neither of us can ever make more money. What that basically means is it's completely unexploitable. Our opponent, no matter what they do, can never make more money than us. They have no incentive to do anything. Our defenses are perfect. They can't make more money. Yeah. So this strategy is typically called game theory optimal. Yeah. We have no weaknesses. And what's really important here is when we were talking about Nash equilibrium, we said that it's not the strategy that wins the most. It just doesn't have weaknesses. Neither our opponent or us have incentive to change our strategy. So it could be that we're both in a situation where we're not making money, but we're just not losing. Sorry, that last thing I said is a bit confusing. What's the best way to rephrase this? I think probably best with examples to just demonstrate this last idea, but our strategy doesn't necessarily win the most, it just doesn't lose. Keep that in mind as we go over these next examples to maybe make it clearer. So yeah, before we get to the set examples, in reality, because poker is so unbelievably huge, we cannot know this perfect math strategy. And if you bring out a ton of computing power in very specific situations, one of these over 10 to the 150, we can then say, okay, here's what we should be doing. Rather than using a bunch of computing power to do this, will be getting this GTO strategy through logic and math, and all top professionals today play this strategy. For the decades as the math behind the strategy has come out, a lot of people have said, "Oh, I don't play GTO. I play exploitative poker," or "GTO is no good. I play different." Pretty much all of these pros have faded from the scene. There's a reason for that. They keep losing money. If you play this strategy, you'll make more money, and so it's survival of the fittest, and this is what's stuck around. So now this prisoner's dilemma is a classic example of a Nash equilibrium, and it doesn't really apply very well to poker, but there's one part of it that I do like, and it kind of illustrates that our strategy isn't necessarily the one that does the best for us as far as making money. It just doesn't lose. So here is an example where we're not doing the best as we possibly could. We're just not losing because we don't have incentive to change our strategy. So here's the setup for the problem. Prisoners A and B are each brought into interrogation rooms and asked to confess. If they both confess, they get 5 years. If they both stay silent, they only get 2. If one confesses and the other doesn't, they only get 1 year. So obviously they would really like it if both of them remained silent, or you would really like it if you confessed and the other person remained silent. What you really want to avoid more than anything is both of you confessing. Now, what actually happens is both players will always confess. The reason for this is honestly not that complicated. Think of it from the perspective of one prisoner. Say I'm prisoner A. If B remains silent, I serve 1 year instead of 2 by confessing. If B confesses, I serve 5 instead of 8 by confessing. So no matter what my opponent does, I will always benefit by confessing. So I should just confess every time. And so we end up with the situation where we both don't get the best outcome, but the way our motives are set up, we both always end up confessing. Now, as for a situation that actually applies to poker in like a strong way, I got to thank Teo for showing me this example. I'm a big fan of it. Is the ice cream vendor on a beach. So let's say I'm the blue ice cream stand, and I'm trying to figure out the best place to set up. I get whatever section of the beach is closer to me than to my opponent. So my opponent, the green stand, is set up on the far right here. I start thinking, hey, wait, if I move my blue ice cream stand closer to the middle, I'll take more area of the beach, and so then I'll make more money. So in 2, I've moved my stand over. And my opponent, green, says, hey, wait a second, I need to get my territory back. I'm going to move over so that I take more away from blue. And now we get each back to having half and half of the beach. And then finally, what ends up happening is we're both in the middle. So if you compare 1 to 4, we both still control half the beach. But the difference from 1 to 4 is in 4, we're now unexploitable. No matter where green decides to put their ice cream stand, we would still get at least half of the beach. Whereas in 1, we have weaknesses that can get taken advantage of. So this is kind of what happens in a game like poker, is as we each try to exploit each other. I try to say, you're calling too much. I'm going to bet when I've got a good hand. Then they'll say, oh, he bets a bunch and they've got a good hand, so maybe I should fold more often there. We kind of slowly start to approach this equilibrium where we're like each player is playing an unexploitable strategy. You know, I like lecturing more when people can ask questions to prove like I'm doing a good job explaining things, because I hope I don't sound just completely crazy right now and you have no clue what I'm saying. If you do, talk to me about it. So another thing we want to talk about is the best case scenario for poker, or just the insane swings and luck you can get. So at the time of this graph, this is from like 2016-ish, OTB Red Baron was considered the best player in online poker. Nowadays, opinions have shifted. You could ask anyone and they might say, oh, True Teller is the best, or Linus Love is best, or Limitless is the best. But OTB has always consistently been top 5 best in the world. And around this time, he was undisputed the best. So you can still see that in this range here, from about 50,000 hands off to 100,000 hands, he lost money. So for 50,000 hands, as the best poker player in the world, he lost money. Just think about that. Granted, he's also playing the best players in the world, but that just goes to show how insane the swings and variance can get in poker. And he won $33,000 in only 40 days playing 100K hands online here, which to us like sounds crazy. You made 33K in 40 days. Well, you also have to remember he's the best in the world. If you take that out to a year, he's making like 300K a year. Imagine being like the LeBron James of poker and making 300K a year. And there's all these swings up and down too. Some of these pros will just have bad years where they make 50K. They might have a great year too where they make a lot more, but it's very variance heavy. So poker, tough game. We thankfully can still do pretty well for ourselves at lower to mid stakes. And if we were to talk about like kind of his returns here, for said he won about 13.9 big blinds per 100. This is how people measure win rate in poker. We'll have a lecture on this, but every 100 hands he made an average of 3.9 big blinds, and I can't really see the stake. I forget. That comes out to a pretty decent amount of money for the big blind. So if we look here at this is just kind of like a rough demonstration. On average, he expected to make say $20,000 every 100 or every 10,000 hands that he played, or every 100,000 hands he'd expect to make 20K. If he was doing lucky, doing better than average, he might make 33K. If he was doing unlucky, he might break even, or he might lose a whole bunch. Poker, again, lots of swings, lots of variance, and it can feel very cruel at times, but it's also what lets us make money playing it, because bad players don't know that they're losing money. Now, next Nash equilibrium example. This is my favorite of all the ones that we have. I think it does a really good job of illustrating GTO poker. So rock, paper, scissors is a solved game, which means we know the best unexploitable strategy, which is just throw rock, paper, scissors 1/3 of the time. On the other hand, Hold'em is not solved. Our opponent cannot exploit any weaknesses in this rock, paper, scissors strategy, even if we tell them what we're doing. So I could tell you 1/3 of the time I'm going to throw a rock, I'm going to throw paper, I'm going to throw scissors. You can't do anything to that. There's no weaknesses. And this is a really important part of Nash equilibrium strategies. Our opponent can know what our strategy is, and they don't get any advantage from it. So our opponent can know we're playing GTO poker. If we're playing perfectly, we're still invincible. So as far as telling them what our strategy is, it would mean that they would know, oh, 23% of the time here, Aiden has pocket aces. And when he has pocket aces, 72% of the time he bets, 17% of the time he will check. And they would just know this for every single one of our hands. They could know this. That's our strategy in a given situation. And they wouldn't be able to use it to exploit us, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. So yeah, that's why we play GTO. Yeah, they can know what we're doing, and it still doesn't save them. So now we're going to go over the weaknesses of GTO strategy. Suppose our opponent throws a rock every single time. Now, our strategy is paper third, scissors third, rock third. So we would win 1/3 of the time, lose 1/3 of the time, and tie 1/3 of the time. So on average, we wouldn't even be winning. We would be break even, which is crazy. They're throwing rock every time. We should be winning. It should be destroying them. So sometimes we need to deviate from playing game theory to beat up on people with obvious weaknesses. This goes back to GTO doesn't win to the most, it just doesn't lose. Our 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 strategy won't lose, but it won't win here either. So now let's say we switch it up. We throw 1/6 rock, 4/6 paper, 1/6 scissors. So we're throwing more paper, we're going to be winning when they throw rock. But this means now we have a weakness. If our opponent were to start throwing more scissors and then like an equal amount of the remaining rock on paper, we would be losing. So this is very important. When we open up from our indestructible strategy to exploit weaknesses, we also open up weaknesses for ourselves. So it becomes a really important balancing act. If we're going to adjust to exploit somebody, how do we protect ourselves from getting bullied when we do it? And yeah, for this class, GTO is our strategy is going to consist of 2 parts. One, we're going to learn GTO as best as we possibly can to give us a really strong defense and make life difficult for other players. It's also important. GTO isn't just a defense. It's also a sword. It's something we can attack people with, but it's not as good as if we play exploitatively and win a whole bunch of money that way. And then we'll cover how to identify weaknesses in our opponent's strategy, and then when we can shift away from GTO to take advantage of their weaknesses. So even if we know optimally we should be playing this many hands, we can maybe start playing more hands to take advantage of their mistakes. Yeah. And you need to know GTO to know how to play exploitative. If I know my opponent's playing too many hands, then how do I know the best way to bully them if I don't know what the baseline to begin with is? Again, you'll hear a lot of players say, I don't need that strategy and theory stuff. I'm exploitative. I know how to take advantage of their weaknesses. Well, you need the baseline to begin with. You can't have one without the other. So what does poker GTO actually look like? So again, that's going to be with the whole classes, what we do in each point, why it's close to game theory, and then why we like it. But in general, we can talk about strategic principles, maybe what we want to do. We want to put our opponent in tough situations. We want to make their life very difficult. When their life is difficult, it means that if the decision's hard, then they don't really have ways to take advantage of us. It also gets people to make mistakes. From an exploitative perspective, if they make the more tough situations they are in, the more opportunities they have to make mistakes. We don't want to get put in tough situations ourselves. If we don't get bullied, we can't lose as much money. And then we also really want to conceal as much information as possible about our hand. We want to have them to have no clue. We want to keep them guessing. And then what these really imply is the GTO strategy is aggressive, it plays strong hands, and bluffs frequently. And when I have these 3 points listed out here, important to recognize what I mean is that it's not absurdly aggressive to the point where it's a weakness. It's aggressive enough that our opponent feels like they have a bunch of pressure on them. We don't only play strong hands and fold a bunch. We just don't play bad garbage hands. We play the better quality hands that where our opponent can think, hey, they might have a flush, they might have a straight, they might have a pair here, things like that. And yeah, when we bluff frequently, we bluff just enough to keep them guessing. We don't bluff like crazy to the point where they think we're a crazy person. Yeah. And our goal is to be as annoying and confusing as possible. If someone in poker tells you you're being annoying and they don't like playing with you, that's a compliment. You want them to find you annoying. It can actually be a bit troublesome if you want to get invited back to certain games. You got to start being nicer, but in general, you want people to not like you. And actually, if you watch pro poker players, they will judge whether a play they made was good based on whether it makes the other person uncomfortable. So let's say they're in a situation where they're debating a bet. They really want to make this bet, but they think about it for 5 minutes and do all this thinking, and they say, okay, I'll bet $10,000. If it takes their opponents minutes of thinking and their opponents are going like this and they're freaking out, then the poker player will say, oh, that was a good bet. I'm happy with that bet. Even if they call and I lose, that was a good bet because it made them think, it made them uncomfortable. That's generally our goal, to make their lives miserable. Yeah. Course codes, sorry, it's a Zoom. You don't get a course code. Figure it out. And yeah, that's it for the playing session. Anyway, that's it for the recording. Sorry if anything I said was a bit off. Again, it's easier to lecture in person when I can see faces looking at me confused or raise hands and ask me questions. So yeah, just let me know if anything didn't make much sense. Later.